My name is Daniel Harper, and for most of my life, 40 acres of untouched land on the edge of our small town meant far more than money. It was my grandfather's dream. He bought it in 1951 after returning from military service, clearing the brush with nothing more than a borrowed tractor and determination. He always said the land wasn't meant to make us rich overnight. It was supposed to stay in the family until someone was ready to build something meaningful on it. For decades, we did exactly that. We paid every property tax bill on time, maintained the access road, kept the fences repaired, and visited every few weeks. It wasn't flashy property. There were no buildings except an old wooden shed, no paved driveway, and no utilities except a small water line installed years ago. But it belonged to us, and everyone around town knew it. Things changed when a luxury subdivision called Pine Ridge Estates was built next to our property. The developers transformed old farmland into hundreds of expensive homes surrounded by decorative stone walls, artificial ponds, and perfectly trimmed landscaping. Shortly after the last houses were completed, a homeowners association was formed. The new HOA president, Charles Whitmore, loved authority. He walked through the neighborhood carrying a clipboard as though he were the mayor. Residents whispered about warning letters over mailbox colors, fines for basketball hoops, and threats against anyone who left a trash bin outside a few hours too long. None of that concerned me because our family land wasn't inside their subdivision. It sat beside it, separated by a county-maintained gravel road and legally recorded property boundaries that had existed for generations. One Saturday morning I drove out to inspect the property because my wife and I had finally decided to build a retirement home there. I expected to spend the day measuring the future building site. Instead, I nearly drove into a chain stretched across the entrance. Hanging from the chain was a large metal sign that read, "Private HOA Community Property. Unauthorized entry prohibited." At first I honestly laughed because I assumed someone had made a mistake. Then I noticed fresh tire tracks leading into the field and several orange construction stakes scattered across our land. My stomach dropped. I cut the chain with bolt cutters I kept in the truck and drove inside. Halfway across the property, I found 3 workers unloading equipment. They wore safety vests displaying the logo of a landscaping company. I asked what they were doing. One of them politely explained they had been hired by Pine Ridge Estates to prepare the area for a new community recreation park complete with walking trails and picnic shelters. I told him every inch of the ground beneath his boots belonged to my family. He looked genuinely confused and handed me a printed site map stamped with the HOA's letterhead. On their map, my entire property had simply been colored green and labeled Community Expansion Parcel. I drove straight to the HOA office. Charles Whitmore greeted me with a smile that disappeared the moment I explained who I was. Without inviting me to sit down, he calmly announced that their attorneys had determined the parcel had always been intended as community open space. According to him, an old subdivision document proved ownership had transferred years ago. When I demanded to see the deed, he slid a blurry photocopy across the desk. It referenced land descriptions that didn't even match my parcel number. I pointed that out immediately. Charles simply shrugged and said county records were often inaccurate decades ago. Then he informed me that entering the property again could result in trespassing charges because the HOA was now responsible for maintaining it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I left without another word and drove directly to the county recorder's office. The clerk searched every document associated with our parcel dating back to the 1950s. There wasn't a single deed transferring ownership. Not one easement, not one legal amendment. Every tax payment had been made by my grandfather, then my father, and finally me. Legally, nothing had changed. The clerk even laughed when I explained the HOA's claim. She told me they had no authority over land outside the subdivision boundaries. Armed with certified copies of every deed, I returned to the property the next morning expecting the misunderstanding to end. Instead, I found something even worse. Heavy equipment had already begun clearing trees near the entrance. Several mature oak trees that had stood there longer than I had been alive were lying on the ground. Wooden survey stakes marked future walking paths. I confronted the construction supervisor, but he refused to stop because he claimed he was following instructions from the HOA and their attorneys. Every minute the bulldozers kept running, decades of family history disappeared. That afternoon I hired one of the best property attorneys in the county. She didn't waste time. After reviewing the deeds, tax records, and subdivision maps, she told me our ownership looked extremely solid. What concerned her wasn't whether we owned the property but how the HOA had convinced contractors and even local officials that they had any claim at all. She immediately filed for an emergency injunction to halt construction. During the first hearing, Charles Whitmore appeared with 2 attorneys carrying thick binders filled with documents. They argued that an old planning agreement connected our parcel to the subdivision through a forgotten development proposal decades earlier. Their presentation looked convincing at first glance. But under questioning, my attorney noticed something unusual. Every document referred to preliminary planning maps rather than recorded deeds. Planning maps show ideas. Deeds establish ownership. They had confused the two, intentionally or not. The judge ordered construction paused until ownership could be verified through an independent survey. That's when everything changed. The county hired an experienced surveyor named Michael Lawson. Unlike modern surveyors who rely almost entirely on GPS, Michael believed old boundary markers told the real story. He spent days walking through thick brush with metal detectors and historical maps. On the fourth day he called us to the property. Hidden beneath decades of soil and weeds sat a brass survey monument installed in 1951 by the original county survey crew. The marker still carried the official identification number matching the legal description in my grandfather's deed. From that single point, every boundary line matched our property records almost perfectly. Even more surprising, the monument revealed something the HOA had never expected. Their decorative stone entrance wall wasn't built entirely inside the subdivision. Nearly 18 feet of the wall, along with expensive landscaping and part of a decorative pond, actually sat on our land. The atmosphere shifted overnight. For months Charles Whitmore had insisted our land belonged to the HOA. Now the official survey proved the HOA itself had built permanent structures across our property without permission. The judge ordered both parties back into court. Michael testified calmly, explaining how the original monument, combined with additional iron pins found along the boundary, confirmed ownership beyond any reasonable dispute. The survey wasn't close. There wasn't a gray area. The property belonged entirely to my family. Then my attorney asked a question nobody expected. If the HOA truly believed they owned this land, why did they never pay property taxes? Silence filled the courtroom. County tax records showed our family had paid every tax bill continuously for 75 years. The HOA had never paid a single dollar because they never actually owned the parcel. Charles attempted to argue the taxes had been overlooked. The judge didn't seem impressed. Then came another surprise. Emails obtained during discovery revealed internal conversations between HOA board members months before construction began. Charles replied that once the park was completed, removing it would be politically impossible, and the owner would probably settle rather than fight. That sentence changed everything. The judge permanently blocked the HOA from entering our property. Everyone admired had been built in the wrong location from the beginning. Many homeowners weren't angry at us. They were furious with their own board. Special meetings became heated. Financial records were examined. The landscaping contractor who had unknowingly entered our land apologized personally after seeing the court records. He admitted they had trusted the HOA's documentation without independently verifying ownership because associations usually controlled common areas. He even volunteered equipment to help restore damaged sections of the property. We designed it carefully so the front porch overlooked the same open meadow my grandfather loved. Near the driveway, we placed the restored brass survey monument inside a protective glass display with a small plaque explaining its history. Every time I drive past it, I notice something missing. The confidence. The new board focuses on maintaining the neighborhood instead of expanding its authority. As for our land, every survey marker is now professionally documented, every corner is clearly marked, and digital records are stored in multiple locations. I hope no one ever challenges our ownership again. Land doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the person who can prove it.